Okay then, comrades, we'll begin, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's Labour Left Alliance education session. We're running a series of discussions and introductions to various aspects of Marxism, and this evening's session is on Marx and religion, and our introduction's given by Mark Lewis. I suppose, as our sort of printed introduction says, we're all very familiar with the reference to Marx and religion being the opium of the people. But I think that Marx's ideas on both the nature of religion and the significance of religion go much beyond that. And indeed, that phrase, and indeed the section that it's taken from, is often really taken out of context. And in fact, if we look at that section, we can see probably a much richer and a much deeper sense of the nature of religion and indeed religious ideas, and indeed what religion represents for human society, but in particular for the working class under capitalism. So without much further ado and introduction, I'll introduce Mark. Mark will speak, I think, for around about half an hour to 40 minutes, and then that will be followed by questions and discussion. If you want to come into the discussion, please use the raise hand function, which should be on your sort of panel on your screen. Alternatively, you can put some questions in the chat box. I will try to keep up with those, as will other comrades, but it's probably easier if you raise your hand and come in that way. So I'll begin and hand over now to Mark, who's going to talk about Marx and religion. So thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, comrades.
Sorry, Mark, can you move your camera down a bit? We can't. Yes, thank you.
Thanks to comrades who have organized these webinars. I think they're turning out to be quite useful. Okay, religion, what do we do about it? I don't know if comrades in the audience, if there are any comrades in the audience who regard this issue as a secondary one at best. I disagree, but ironically enough, our skeptical comrades could possibly rustle up a heavyweight co-thinker or two to put me in my place, at least on the surface of the comments. I'm specifically talking about Karl Marx, which Kev introduced some ideas about that in his introduction. Karl Marx, who after his experience, rather rigorous experience with the young Hegelians, did not find religion simply in itself a subject of any interest or substance. He wrote in a letter to his collaborator, Arnold Rouge, quote, "Religion has no content of its own. It lives not from heaven, but from earth, and falls of itself with the dissolution of the inverted reality whose theory it is." Despite this, Marx was to write far more as on the question of religion, as Kev indicated, but mostly within the framework of its relationship with the concrete society as it presents itself in alienated form. I would argue that the circumstances we work under in today's world compel us to take the issue seriously and to regard it as important for our work. This is not because our world, this is not only rather because our world is saturated with religions of one sort or another. Look at the United States and its Christian right. Look at the post-Stalinist Russia's Orthodox Church's comeback. More than that, however, the forms that religious beliefs take are, as Marx says, inverted reflections of the nature of the society that they are engendered in. Understanding religion, then, is a vital tool to understanding society itself. The relative strength of religion in our contemporary world is a situation which I would suggest is at least partially a product of the failure of the left to build mass democratic Marxist politics with a realistic perspective of coming to power and changing society fundamentally for the good. That and the horrors of Stalinism, I would also add. Certainly the lazy, rather stupid assumption shared by many Marxists at one time, again, influenced by the sort of mechanical type of Marxism that Stalinism also embodied. That assumption of many Marxists that scientific and technological progress, together with advances in education, would automatically lead to the withering away of religion, was crudely narrow and simply was obviously nonsense, crap, as I've indicated by what's going on in the world today. Religion in its various institutional forms, the church, the mosque, the synagogue, continue actively or passively to provide an ultimate supernatural legitimation of the political and social status quo and of values dear to the heart of the bourgeoisie, i.e. such as, it's easy to think of these things, such as the sanctity of private property, the God-given hierarchical nature of social orders being natural in that sense. Think of in Britain with all things bright and beautiful, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estates. Now, the Church of England has quietly dropped that verse, but nevertheless, in a real sense, that template still exists. So let's specifically look at the UK in relation to religion and how it fits into that structure of bourgeois society, that structure of how the bourgeoisie rules. In a typical bourgeois democracy, whatever that is, they're normally quite varied, but let's, for the sake of argument, let's say a natural bourgeois democracy. There was a constitutional separation between church and state. Not so in Britain, of course, where the Church of England, by law established, has the monarch as its nominal head and is deeply enmeshed in the relations of power and patronage, have the crown as their fountainhead. It's imperative that we take these constitutional forms seriously. They are specific instruments of repression that the ruling class use to legitimize their rule. There's a rather Philistine trend within our ranks, unfortunately, in the ranks of the left, that say these sorts of questions are secondary at best. So I put in mind, for example, of the Morning Star, which was admirable in its way, which is not something you normally hear me say about the Morning Star, for its headline on the day of the marriage of Charles and Diana. They reported it as a traffic jam in central London, from my memory, which is funny, but Philistine as well. The first question we need to muse on is what religion actually is. This is not straightforward, and not as straightforward, at least, as we might imagine. And when you think about it, it is bound to be the case that anything so highly varied and complex and filtered through so many different indigenous cultures, histories, etc., it's bound to be complex by dint of that fact alone. The most common definition of the category of religion, with some exceptions, is a belief in a god or a gang of gods or a gaggle of gods, whatever the collective noun is for gods. But given what I've said about the multitude of different influences that impact on religions, it is, like the wonderfully weird platypus, extremely hard to pin a definitive definition to. Definitions can become hazy around the edges and cannot precisely encompass everything in the field that we're looking at. For example, the gods definition is fuzzy for a lot of varieties of Buddhism. Further complications come in by the fact that Buddhism teaches that there are divine beings, entities that could be called gods. There are heavens, there are rebirths, the usual checklist of these myths. But none of the gods, for example, are regarded as the creators of humans. Although these divine beings do hang around as well for quite a long time, they are not eternal. So perhaps I'm stretching it a little bit here, but arguably, you might even include as religious, if not religions in themselves, Some of those categories, such as self-help, improvement movements, transcendental meditation, and it's yogic flying. Yogic flying doesn't class itself as a religion, but Scientology does. So it has a wide range of phenomena that could be invested. It could be looked at as having some sort of religious aspect to it. I'll throw another thing into the mix for the sake of it being contradicted. It is a stretch, I admit. Some of the job-seeking coaches used to motivate unemployed white-collar workers skirt quite close to mysticism in themselves, very ably chronicled by the US writer Barbara Ehrenreich in books like Bait and Switch. Essentially, the premise of this is, if you will hard enough, if you concentrate hard enough on the job you want, you will get the job. If you don't get the job that you want, you did not will hard enough. So you're unemployed and living in your car because you didn't have the energy to change your reality, which is, you know, full of nonsense and full of idealism in lots of ways. And it skirts with notions of religion, I would say. Ehrenreich comments that these scams are particularly prevalent in the US, given the atomized nature of US society, etc. Anyway, I think for our purposes, we should restrict ourselves to the world's great religions that, you might say, tick the mainstream boxes. So let's be clear about the topic. We'll settle on some points, therefore, which includes features that are common to most. So religions have a belief in a god or gods. That seems to be the first criteria. The implication exists as well, at least the implication, that we are surrounded by supernatural phenomena that operate outside of the general laws of how we observe the material world to be, how the universe works. That said, however, for religion, the universe is not a force beyond comprehension, necessarily. It just has a scientific, it's just that a scientific understanding or the observed laws of nature cannot penetrate deep enough to understand the truth in big letters, the supernatural core of the universe itself, gods or gods. In many ways, given the variety of religions I have mentioned, theology and academic definitions of religion are very hit and miss. As I've said, that is bound to be the case with anything so varied and complex. Religious ideas and practices vary a tremendous degree from country to country and often crazily overlap and interweave between countries and even between individuals themselves. Think of this: a baptized, church-going Nigerian Christian might well also perform rituals to placate witches, ancestors, evil spirits, and actually see no contradiction in that sort of smorgasbord of religions, practices. While I'm at it, just to add another layer of complexity, certainly when we look at the past, it's obvious that the distinction often drawn between religion and magic is false historically and artificial. Historic opposition to magic has mostly been official religion's brutal hostility to other, often unofficial plebeian religions. This was also associated with profound societal change, so the rise of capitalism, for example. Francis Bacon, the philosopher and statesman, captured it quite pithily when he said magic kills industry, which is a horrible phrase, actually, isn't it? So magic at best was a primitive form of science, and the medieval church at its worst undoubtedly permitted its own version of magic: holy water to drive out evil spirits, prayers to cure the sick, consecrated bells to dispel storms, all of that sort of thing. So before we go further, I'll try to pull together some basic aspects of the varied forms of religion. I'm going to use the help of Kautsky in this, just to annoy the ideologically muscle-bound, but I found this passage of his quite useful. We can, following Kautsky, characterize religion under two headings. First, he suggests there's religion as personal experience, an individual morality governing the way an individual person interacts with other individuals and with society. Tom Paine, the revolutionary Democrat and deist from the 1700s, derided organized religion and, quote, the strange fables of the Christian creed. Instead of relying on faith, people should marvel at creation itself. So religion can be approached in terms of the inner self, an introspective search for knowledge, a narcissistic pick and mix that tries to transcend the tedious drabness of everyday life, and which supposedly puts the devotee in touch with the divine, one-to-one, as it were. Second, excuse me, according to Kautsky, there is the religion as a means of control, an institutionally embodied and evolved system of doctrines that purports to depict creation and the whole subsequent course of the universe, and which demands human obedience to the supernatural power or powers. So these are very two different takes on religion. Despite that, while the first involves self-motivation, self-consolation, and self-delusion, the second requires that the inner self be subordinated to an external authority that is supposedly divinely sanctioned. Personal religion is guided by conscience. Religion as a means of social control demands the submission of conscience. Yet, personal religion is, of course, always socially determined and lived through society. It is not practiced in a vacuum. Therefore, the study of any particular human being and their private beliefs, up to and including those who imagine they have an inspired mission, is inseparable from the society that they live in. So when we try to understand religions, we must be clear that we're looking for the human origins of the supernatural, and in turn, using the ideas of the supernatural to grasp the human. This allows us to shine a light on the very beginning of the specific human origins of supernatural, I wouldn't say religions, because they were too early, supernatural beliefs or customs, and to cast a light, as I said, on humanity itself. Religion then, as defined by Marxism, is defined by the seeming oxymoron, fantastic reality. Fantastic because religion claims the gods, the miracles, the defiance of the basic laws of physical universe, these simply cannot be. So they're fantastical in that sense. But at the same time, it is reality because these claims are, as Christopher Caldwell put it, quote, causally linked to material reality, and not only determined, but also they determine in their turn, exerting a causal influence on their matrix, i.e. People are influenced by the ideas of religion, and also they frame religion by the type of society that they're in. It's for this reason that religion should not be dismissed as simply false consciousness. It reflects something of the real. More than that, religious ideas are not only determined by reality, they can themselves, again, as written by Caldwell, become materially effective. The ideas people have in their heads, especially when mediated through powerful institutions such as churches, mosques, and temples, and no matter how ethereal, wrapped in the godly and seemingly unrelated to the world, these things impact on their surroundings. They make a dent on society. The approach that abstracts religion from society and treats the evolution of it as just supposedly synonymous with the progress of gaining knowledge is reactionary and doesn't take us anywhere in terms of the understanding of the phenomenon. So let's go back and remember Marx's quote at the beginning of this discussion, which I was terrified that that was going to be nicked from me by Kevin. So, religion in and of itself can have no history simply because it has no content. there is no God. What surrounds and absorbs, what absorbs and gives it content and agency in the society in. Now, there's a small but important digression here. Hopefully what I've said will be reasonably uncontroversial for lefties of various stripes. However, it is challenged by some opponents of Marxism. For example, there is a counterattack strategy that is deployed by some Christian organizations that, while wrong, do utilize some painful facts for us lefties. Specifically, okay, some religious people say, excuse me, religions have a pretty spotty record when it comes to claims about how the world was made, the predictions it's made. But then what about the predictions that Marxism has made over the years? It's had its own wildly inaccurate estimations of the global balance of forces, prospects for revolution, the evolution of some of the dodgy allies that we've cuddled up to, etc. While the efficacies of the prophecies touted by religion have proved pretty useless, what about us Marxists and historical and dialectical materialism? Then there are the gods. Well, you just look at crude cults around Stalin, Mao, Enver Hoxha, and even to really scrape the bottom of the barrel of gurus, Jerry Healy. We've had our people who've been elevated to exalted heights, normally with no reason at all. Then there's the mystic realm of the dialectic and alienation. Unseen forces that operate on humanity, things turn into their opposites. The true mechanics of capitalist society works behind a veil that hides the way the world actually operates, and its dynamics control us all. Okay, that last one wasn't brilliantly convincing, but you see, there are aspects of religion that could be turned around, emptied of content, and say, well, look, you Marxists are just the same. You Marxists are hypocritical in that sense. They might sting a little, but these jibes, but really are easy to refute or are worthwhile refuting. But the way we refute them actually serves to highlight the integral problem of religion in contrast to the historically specific problems that Marxism has suffered from. That is, the basic tenet of Marxism can be summed up by the idea that the struggle to achieve universal human liberation, in order to do that, its first necessity is to form the working class into a party, and through a qualitative development of democracy, replace the rule of capital with the rule of the collective working class. So when it comes to our party, communists are required to accept that, that program, something like it. They are not necessarily required to agree with every dot and comma. A vital distinction between us and religion. And of course, the program can be added to, altered, updated according to needs, circumstances, new developments. All it takes is a vote in Congress. It doesn't require any burning bushes or the heavens cleaving and angels coming down. There is nothing like this in establishment religions. Just a caveat about this webinar as well. I'm not looking in any detail at some of the popular rebellious movements of the past, insurgent movements that we embrace as part of a history as Marxists, and who lent on readings of religions of one sort or another, because it's too well worthy of other webinars and too detailed to go into in this webinar. Okay, how do we leave Marx? How do we leave religion behind then? I think we find in Marx the key ideas that can allow us to reform the foul circumstances that create the need for religious supplication. He writes, and this is where I repeat some of what Kev said, quote, "Religious suffering is at the same time an expression of real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the feeling of a heartless world, and the soul of the soulless circumstances. It is the opium of the people. The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. The demand to give up the illusions about their condition is the demand to give up a condition that requires illusion. The criticism of religion is therefore the germ of the criticism of the valley of tears, whose halo religion is. So, while Marx had a personal aversion to religion, his supremely human morality recognized why it is that religion, as a form of what he dubbed elsewhere as the reversed world consciousness, can take such a hold on those whose oppression and degradation under capitalism lead them to find, quote, lead them to try to find themselves in an upside down world, a world of nightmare illusions. Note there's a charge that has sometimes been thrown at Marx and Marxists, something that is supposed to highlight our indifference to the suffering of working people who turn to religion as a solace against the horror of the world. In fact, it proves the exact opposite. The famous religion is the opium of the people, just referenced at the beginning of this meeting. But the context of the use of opium in Marx and Engels' time was that it was a means to alleviate pain, not necessarily to get off your face, but something to just to stop the agony for some time. Rendered today, it would be something along the lines of religion is the sedative or the painkiller of the people. So following Marx, I've tried to emphasize the need to study religion in two ways. Yes, its variance should be understood specifically via historical justifications, its history, the history of events to understand its own nature. But crucially, its specific mode of self-justification must be understood by the society it inhabits. The genuine history of that society, the movement of classes and revolutionary upheavals, of the changes of modes of production, etc. That is what gives religion its strength, not God. That gives religion its operative content. Okay. Now, a challenge to the societal explanation I've put forward here has come from the neo-Darwinist school historically. This looks for ways for religion to be somehow beneficial to individuals in evolutionary terms. They look for ways in which various religious systems are thereby reproduced through natural selection. So we have somebody like Paul Bloom suggesting that children are, as he puts it, quote, psychologically primed for religion because it's an advantage for them to be gullible when it comes to the stories, which are in fact instructions that come down to them from their parents or from others, i.e. don't talk to strangers, don't do this, don't wander off into the woods, Hansel and Gretel. In other words, religion is a byproduct of an attribute that has real productive advantage and is therefore passed on in our genes. However, to explain why the human mind, which evolved to cope with the real world, can develop the beliefs that are patently not real, we don't need biology, but the much higher form of culture. The first appearance of religious ideologies happened, it's reckoned pretty authoritatively, between 60 and 30,000 years ago. Yet, whatever the exact timing of the beginning of symbolic culture and therefore religious belief, all the evidence shows that there have been only minor, to all intents and purposes, insignificant genetic changes over the recent period, in biological terms. Despite that, religion has changed enormously and has done so again and again. Clearly, social factors are key, not something that's lodged in our DNA, as it were. Social factors are the main determinant. Okay. Let me just see where I am. How long have I had, Comrades?
30 minutes or so, Mark. So you've still got about 10 or so.
Another 10 minutes, yeah. Okay. The rise of class society gave different contents to religion. As I've said, religion is empty. As Marx said, religion is empty. The society fills it. So the rise of class society gave it different contents, depending on the nature of these new societies, their longevity, etc. Via the specific form of capitalism, religion thereby becomes the inverted consciousness of this capitalist world, because human society itself is inverted via alienation. The products of human labor, be they intellectual, manual, artistic, morph into something independent of them. More than that, they morph into something dominating over them, and thus distorting their view of their own individual lives and of society itself. Okay, many can see this or perhaps feel it instinctively. The idea is ubiquitous in sci-fi. Look at the Matrix series. Number one is the best. Don't bother with the rest, really. So I want to finish with the question of how we approach people of faith, whether they have a faith that is essentially a personal one, or whether they are aligned in some way to institutional bodies, institutional religions. And specifically, I want to pose this question, because I think it, in its own type of way, it goes to the heart of what type of parties, Marxist parties, we Marxists, I presume not everybody on this meeting is a Marxist, but what type of Marxist parties we Marxists want to create. Just to underline, I believe that Marxist materialism is totally irreconcilable with any form of religious belief. It is, to quote Lenin's words, quote, a materialism which is absolutely atheistic and hostile to all religion, i.e. Marxism. To call oneself a Marxist and at the same time to believe in God is not just a personal contradiction, it's a philosophical absurdity, really. Marxism without atheism would not merely be inconsistent, but fundamentally self-contradictory. However, people are self-contradictory. This is a fact. When mass parties of the working class of various types have been built, it's inevitable that they had within them comrades with confused, religious, even reactionary individual prejudices. I think from our point of view, in terms of building the sort of party and building the type of culture that we want around that party, mass party, that will be for individuals to reconcile themselves, to get over or leave at the end of the day. It is certainly not the job of Marxists to make concessions to what are essentially reactionary individual prejudices. I'll finish therefore, before my voice goes out, I'll finish with a sort of checklist that hopefully flows in some sort of logical way from what I've said in this meeting, and again focused in on not practical tasks in a crude type of way, but sort of when we take theory and see its realization in the real world and in the how we're going to act in the real world. I think it's worthwhile playing this sort of approach to some of the problems we have in terms of building a Marxist party. Okay. Although I would say that these are some basic ideas and basic principles. Although consistent socialists and communists want to overcome all religious prejudices, we are at the same time have to be the most consistent defenders of the individual's freedom of conscience and freedom of worship, despite the fact that we think these things are retrograde, that we want to see the world overcoming this illusion. Nevertheless, we should be in the front line in defending the right to worship as they will. We should fight. Secondly, I would say we should fight for the disestablishment of we should fight for the establishment of a secular state, i.e. the separation of church and state. This will entail the confiscation of all Church of England property that is not directly connected to acts of worship. For example, land holdings, shared portfolios, art treasures, whatever happened to the poverty of Jesus. Anyway, all state subsidies for religious institutions will be ended. It's not a question of banning the Church of England per se, but its that position of power, of influence, should be ended. There should be freedom for all religious cults, including the Church of England, as I've just said, and also there should be freedom for the space for atheistic propaganda. Religious organizations and individuals have a right to propagate their ideas and seek to win converts. Opponents of religion have the same right. In schools, all state-sponsored religious propaganda and compulsory acts of worship, this must end. Religion is a private, not a state matter. Religion can be studied as a subject of academic interest in state schools, but not to indoctrinate children themselves. Okay, I think maybe some comments might chaff a little bit at those last 5 points that I've mentioned, because there seems to be a certain squeamishness about taking on what I would call higher political stroke constitutional sort of issues, and a rather narrow approach to what constitutes working class politics. From my point of view, and certainly from the trend that I've learned my politics from, the point about the working class is its universality. And so it in particular is of interest in the constitutional arrangements of how we are ruled, how that rule is perpetuated, and how we need to develop an alternative type of society that is one of freedom. Undoubtedly, it is one of freedom, but nevertheless, the job in front of us is this constitutional question. I.e., working class politics is not simply about strikes. It's not simply about 15% on your wages, etc. We have been told off for these ideas before, but I think they are strong ones. Comrades, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Can I just remind comrades that if you want to ask a question or make a contribution at all, please raise your hand. And I can see we've got the first comrade now. Just try and get them up. Okay, Mike Kennard, if you'd like to come in now, Mike. Hi, Mike.
Yeah, on a couple of points. First of all, yeah, I thoroughly support the disestablishment of the church. You know, get it out of the state and the schools, and in doing so, we would also knock away one of the props of the monarchy. Certainly in this country. There's a question was asked: how should we approach fellow socialists who still have religious illusions? And my approach to this is to challenge them on their texts and their behaviour, because in every religion, I can't speak for, can't point to the texts in Islam or Hinduism or whatever. There are instructions about social behaviour and supporting the poor, the stranger, etc. Now, this is most clearly outlined in the Gospel of Matthew, and I hold up, I ask people to hold up their behaviour, Christians to hold up their behaviour against those criteria, and any other. What I say to them is that if you do this, then we can work together, and then we can have the philosophical discussions over several pints in the pub afterwards. So. But yeah, I mean, challenge to people have to be challenged. I mean, you can point to the hypocrisy of somebody like Blair, the warmonger, enriching himself in property, etc., and say, you know, are these people Christians? Challenge, you know, challenge on the basis of their own ground, if you like. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Ken Syme.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Ken.
Thanks. Mark, I feel I've learned a great deal about your attitude to religion tonight, but I don't feel I've learned very much about Marx beyond the 2 or 3 quotations from him that you introduced into your talk. For the record, I happen to be a member of the Church of England, but would support disestablishment of the church. I didn't find your analysis of religion at all convincing. And I thought your certainty in respect of your own views was the kind of certainty that's often attributed to people of religion as evidence of their fanaticism. And I must admit, I was disappointed by the talk, which I had hoped to explain more about Marx's own views on religion rather than your own. So, but thank you anyway.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Anne McShane.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I actually have some sympathy with what Ken said there. I did enjoy the talk, but I do think it would be useful to look at what Marx and Engels did say on religion. I find that interesting in more detail. So I just wanted to start by saying that I disagree with Mike's approach in terms of tackling religious people. I don't think that the role of Marxists or people in Marxist parties is to tackle individual members about their religious beliefs, not unless that person is trying to recruit to their religion through the party. I think that people's religious ideas and beliefs are actually their own business, their own personal business, unless they try and go out, as I say, and recruit, which is a very different thing. In my view, religious beliefs become more and more marginalized in relation to people's activity, but they very much are something which I think is part and parcel of being human in today's society. And I'm against militant atheism, I suppose. Now, the point I wanted to make was something that Mark didn't really raise, I think, which I think is important, is the role of religion in society as part of custom and as part of our rite of passage. So for instance, baptisms, bar mitzvahs, communions, confirmations, weddings and funerals, they're very important events for human beings. And there is a history of human beings, taking part in those events and those being meaningful events. I mean, I think the more secular a society becomes, those events change. And I've had experiences, I've told other comrades here before, of being in Ireland where, for instance, there are still communions, but they're like, it's more about the party afterwards rather than it is about the church ceremony. And actually, to be honest, in terms of funerals, now lots of people don't go to the church, they go to the funeral home. So those things have become more marginal, but there could still be a rosary said, there could still be prayers said, there could still be that to happen. So I think that the role of the Soviet Union is a very negative one after, we'll say like 1926, 27, with the creation of the League for the Militant Godless and the crushing of religion. My research in Central Asia shows a massive onslaught against religious practices, religious symbols, a campaign that was to defeat the clergy, but actually, was very harmful and very repressive in relation to women, particularly, who were forced to unveil and had society turn against them, but also, you know, the mass of the population themselves. And it was a softening up exercise for the 5-year plan. And Nadia Krupskaya spoke at a conference in that period and basically condemned militant atheism and the idea that you could ban religious practices or religious symbols, and said, as Mark himself in this seminar has said, that these are reflections of real material conditions, and it's the material conditions that need to change, not trying to ban the religious practices themselves. And just finally, I think that in terms of the French state, so the French state bans religious symbols in their schools, I think, and in other public buildings, as far as somebody can correct me, but that's as far as I understand. And they include in that the wearing of the veil. So basically, young girls or women are not allowed to go into public spaces, or at least not allowed to go to college and universities and schools wearing the veil. And I think that that is completely wrong. I would believe that what Krupskaya's approach was right, and that you shouldn't have bans on religious symbols. Partly because these are not just religious symbols, these are reflections of the society that that woman or girl is living in, maybe something that's imposed on them by their family, but society doing the opposite thing, banning those practices, I think creates a tension which is a very negative one. Anyway, so thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Tina Beckman.
No, actually, sorry, I've got child duty now. Sorry.
Okay, fine. Susan Richardson.
Mute. Can you hear me?
I can, Susan. Yeah, right. I'm just trying to get your picture on.
I get the video on. Yeah, that's.
Oh, yeah, here you are. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to set myself up for attack now because I'm a committed Christian. I was married for more than 25 years until he died to somebody who said religion's just a way of controlling people, and we got on perfectly well. I would agree that with what you said in that it can be a cause for conflict. For example, when I was a little girl, I remember crossing myself once because somebody showed me how to, and my granny looked at me and said, "You'll be turning Catholic next," because they were Northern Irish Protestants. Similarly, I worked in a school in Sudan once when I was doing VSO, and they had a Coptic Christian headmistress, and the leader of the local barracks didn't like the idea. So he came and tried to take the school over, and she just shut the gates against him and refused to let him in, which I thought was pretty good in the 60s in a Muslim country. And you get conflicts between religions, and you get this stupid arguing and dislike and all the rest of it. But it also on the good side of it, both Islam and Christianity have got a basic principle of love your neighbour and tried to help people. And I've seen that as well in Sudan when my then husband was ill and was taken away, and the people in the village were so kind to me. They were really, really, really nice to me. So I think it's not the religion that's wrong, it's us. Whether it's rows between Tories and Labour, or between Catholics and Christians, or Christians and Muslims, I think it's the bad things that come from it are basically human beings not being grown up, whereas grown up human beings do try and love each other and get on well together. Would you give me sort of I don't know, would you acknowledge that that's reasonable or not?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The last speaker in this round will be Ian Drummond. Okay, Ian.
I think we've already had some great contributions, and I'm glad we're having this discussion, because we we had a couple of weeks ago at our motions conference. Ended up having a good chat on the Zoom about this very subject, because there were some people were a bit unsure about Marxism, the Labour Party Marxist motions, calling ourselves a Marxist group. And I just put something out. I wasn't sure if it was what was behind it or not, but I just put something out about the link between Marxism and atheism, because I must admit I'd probably be less sympathetic to other reasons, like seeing it as too left-wing or whatever. But it led to a great discussion, including on religion in our own ranks, Muslims in the anti-war movement, Jewish supporters of Corbyn, liberation theology, Lenin, of course, despite being a committed atheist himself, was always in favor of allowing religious members into the Bolsheviks. And I think that continued until the 50s. But in the chat that we had, the legacy of the state atheism that Anne was talking about in the Stalinist states definitely still colored some of our own comrades' reticence about Marxism. And I don't think France, by the way, is a great example of secularism. In fact, you could maybe almost make the argument that it's not very secular, the way that they pick on Muslims as an oppressed group in particular. And after the real wave of Muslim involvement, often very left wing, drawing socialist and anti-capitalist conclusions, but coming out of the anti-war movement as Muslims who were oppressed for that reason. I don't think we should be learning much from France, which ever since it opposed the Iraq war has been going further and further down on that front. Tony Greenstein, I think, made probably the outstanding contribution of that chat when he said we're at the he thinks we're at the beginning of our understanding of these deep questions of our place in the universe. I think Engels said something similar in The Dialectic of Nature, which has sometimes been unfairly criticized as a positivist scientist tract. He thought, as an atheist and the son of a rabbi, that religion being based on the supernatural was a block on our deeper understanding of that. But as I said, as the track was drawing to a close, it depends what kind of religion. No, I think someone else said that. I added, and it also depends what kind of atheism. Because I think it would have been good if we'd talked more tonight about Marx and Engels's disputes with the likes of the young Hegelians and Feuerbach. And if I can make a quick self-criticism, last week on the issue of democracy, while I was sort of rambling, I think by the end, I think I made a good point about how the Democrats don't really want to increase American democracy, which could lock the Republicans and the far right out forever, because that would then open them to pressure from their left rather than using that Trumpist ramp as a scarecrow. But I didn't mention that, of course, the left are much better than the corporate Dems at winning over people back from Trump. And I didn't want to leave that out, and I'm sorry that I did a week ago, because I don't want to give any ground to the idea that people with confused ideas are some kind of basket of deplorables, as Hillary said in her horrible phrase. And I think that and that's fundamentally connected to tonight's topic, because I think those kind of bad ideas of idealist religion that Marx was arguing against in the 1840s, they've kept coming back. And from woke corporate centrists to people with identity politics on the far left today. And while I'm at it making self-criticisms, I'll also make a confession. I am a Marxist, and I'm not now, nor have I ever been an atheist. So I'm adding to the list, I guess, on tonight's call. But
there's so many of you.
To wind up now, my own view is that since Marx's day, in some societies like ours, atheism itself, of the kind of smug liberal variety that's a kind of golden thread maybe from Feuerbach to Hillary Clinton, even though Hillary herself, I don't think, is an atheist, but that kind of smug liberalism has become the opium of the people itself. Think the new atheists, Hitchens, Dawkins, Sam Harris, a particularly bad version, justifying wars on grounds of spreading enlightenment around the world. And I think we should see the development of historical materialism itself in historical materialist terms of religion and of irreligion. And it's interesting, we mentioned above, was the first class that rose to consume the first surplus. So it shows how long we've been asking them, but also how long they've been bound up with class interests and corrupted. But I think there's also always been a rebel impulse there. And our last sentence, that's the most reactionary atheist thinker of all, called Christianity. My only problem he said it like
Ian, I think we've lost you there. Mark, would you like to come back and respond to some of those comrades before I bring in a few others?
Yeah, sure. Just a few quick points. Mike, who spoke first on really how to approach comrades, workmates or whatever, who have religious views. I think there's an aspect of all of this that's to do with really hegemony would be a little bit of a large category for it. Maybe part of the fight that we have is to make socialist politics, Marxist politics, as far as I'm concerned, the common sense of masses of people, the working class, but beyond the working class itself. Under those circumstances, when we're confronted, Mike, your friend is in a strike or is campaigning on some injustice, etc., that the common sense kicks in, and it's a Marxist approach to these sorts of questions that becomes natural, becomes the first port of call in that sense. So I don't see, certainly, you can't ban religion. That's an infringement of democracy. It's an appalling idea. But really what we want to do is for society to leave it behind as individuals and as a working class and as a humanity in that sense, which will take time and take patience. But I think that is the approach that we need. I did have the sort of template in mind of essentially giving more on Marx and Engels, but the difficulty is, comrades, I have to say, it's half an hour you aim for. The moment you start delving into one aspect of Marx and Engels on this subject or on any subject, I filled books. I could have filled books on it, and I found it very difficult to edit. That's my problem. So I apologize for too much of me and not enough of Marx and Engels. But that was the only way I really could confine it into some sort of format that would hopefully cause some controversy. I don't know whether Ken calling me a fanatic is a controversy, but there we go. I'm not upset with him. Yeah, part of the common sense in that sense. I thought of, I can't remember what the priest's name was, but I've seen this pithy quote of his on various T-shirts. Is when I give the starving food, people call me a saint. When I ask them why they're hungry, why the poor are hungry, then they call me a communist. I think Marxism has deeper, richer answers for the problems of society than any religion and any other political movement, etc. So, as I say, this common sense question comes. Dawkins and those type of people, well, for very clever people, they approach this sensitive, difficult, complex issue in very stupid ways. Essentially, they just wag their finger and say, "Don't be so silly. You know, don't you know how I've individually disproved this this possibility of God? So why are you being so stupid?" Again, it's not understanding what religion is, how it has its roots in people, people's minds, in people's interaction with other human beings, in society itself. It's worse than useless in terms of changing people's minds about Christianity, I think. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Bring some other people in.
Okay, comrades. Steve Freeman, next.
Unmute myself.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Mark, for that. Actually, I liked your talk, and it was very informative. The point about Marx, I think, it's been raised and answered as well. Two things, well, maybe three things actually. You can see history as a sort of, this is maybe the way the liberal view of it, is that the world is almost in a struggle between the party of science and the party of God. So there's this long struggle which is taking place, and eventually, because of progress, slowly, the party of science will eventually win out and religion will wither away. And that takes, I mean, you could say that's what Dawkins is arguing, really, because the scientific argument will win out in the end because science is advancing anyway. And what that doesn't take into account, you know, so we have to ask, so, well, if that was true, why does it appear that religion is still very powerful, still exists, and maybe even is making a comeback, as it were? So I think that why is it making a comeback then, if it should be on this long trajectory where it sort of slowly disappears? And I think you've got to bring capital in at that point, because capital is doing two things. On one hand, capital needs science, it needs technology, it needs to develop science. You know, we can see how automation, biosciences, all these things, that capitalism is actually using science to make its profit, to develop its accumulation of capital. So really, in one sense, you could say that capital was the gravedigger of religion by doing that. But on the other hand, it's quite clear that capital needs religion to keep people divided. So on the other hand, it needs to set people apart from one another. And religion is one of the weapons, one of the means by which it can do that. And you can see that with what's happening with the Hindu religion in India. We can go look all over the world to see ways in which religion is used by the right as a way of dividing the working class. So capitalism can't get rid of religion for the very reasons it is undermining it on one hand, but on the other hand, it needs it to prop itself up. Think about all the money that billionaires are putting in America to build up the Christian right in America, to see how much money is going behind that. And I think there's another reason as well, and that's the reason that religion actually, for ordinary people, never mind all the money that's going in to keep religion going, but ordinary people, but many people find in religion community, somewhere you can go in a kind of heartless world where you can meet fellow believers, where you can share, where you can sing together, you can go and meet up and have some sort of, the community that's built around churches and mosques and religions is a very, very important component. It gives people something that is missing in the way that individualistic capitalism does. So it actually has a function under capitalism that's popular, as well as being in the interests of capital to keep it going. And I finish with a slightly different point. And I take the point about the withering away of religion. We're not trying to abolish religion. When the social conditions change, religion will wither away, I think. So we're not trying to, you know, I think Marx's idea of withering away really gets the essence of the fact that when we transform society, that religion will become less necessary, maybe because community and those other things will come into play without religion to support it. And I want to finish on maybe on this point, which is that if you come specifically to England, to Britain and the UK and England, you see how religions change. Well, the Church of England is very much like the monarchy. It's very powerful, but it appears quite benign. I mean, we think of the Church of England not really doing anything not being fanatical, not doing anything at all that's particularly bad. It's this kind of benign sort of almost socialistic institution. And it's quite interesting that if you, in some ways, it's at the heart of our constitution. And one of the things that's quite interesting is that when the monarchy is supported by a series of oaths, MPs, the military, armed forces, etc., all have to swear an oath of allegiance to the crown. So our constitution is supported by all kinds of oaths of loyalty to the crown, to the Queen. The one that's different from that is when the Queen does her coronation. What she does is she says in her coronation oath, which is 92, that she's asked by the Archbishop of Canterbury, will you maintain and preserve inviolability, the settlement of the Church of England, and the doctrine, worship, discipline, and government thereof, as by law established in England? And will you preserve unto the bishops and the clergy of England and to the churches they're committed to their charge? And goes on like, I won't go on any more than that. But the Queen has to, she's the unique person that she has, the one that has to swear an oath to maintain the Church of England. And if you think that doesn't make the church very powerful, it does, because if you go back, and I'll finish on this point, if you go back to the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1938, when Edward VIII was forced to abdicate, who was the key mover in that? Who had the authority and the key mover? That it was the Archbishop of Canterbury that played a key role in that. So I think the Church of England is probably much more powerful within our state system than the benign view that we have of it. Like the Queen, she doesn't do anything. The Church of England doesn't do anything, but they are much more central to how our political system works. Finish on that.
Okay, thanks, Steve. A couple of comrades have made some interesting points in the chat box, which would actually be much more usefully developed as a contribution. So please try and come in and make the contribution. It would really help the discussion. Okay, next comrade is Jerry Downing.
Okay, just a point of differentiation between the religion of the oppressed and the religion of the oppressor. I think that's a really important point, because historically, of course, from the Spanish Inquisition and even right through to the Reformation and post-Reformation, religion was used as a means of control of the population, and quite viciously so with the fires of the Inquisition. But there was a dialectic here, because, of course, religion tells you that after you're dead and you go to heaven, you will be, not alone will you be equal, but it is more difficult for the rich man to go to heaven than for the camel to pass through the eye of a needle. So you'll actually be in a privileged position when you go to heaven above the rich man. So that's a very comforting thought. But in times of revolution, when the achievement of equality begins to appear more practical, religious people start to think, well, why should we have to wait until we're dead before we have our equality? Why can't we have some of that here and now? Why can't we have the new Jerusalem here on earth? So people begin to fight for that, and that then becomes the revolutionary impulse. I'll take the instance of Ireland. When the revolutionary period of Ireland was in frame between 1916 or whatever, 1913 maybe to 1923, the church itself was treated with a great deal of irreverence and disrespect. The laws of blasphemy and everything else began to lose their effect. I remember my father telling me about an incident in the church in Kinmare and in Kerry, where the old Monsignor was getting very, very absent-minded, and he gave the parable of the loaves and fishes, and he said, our Lord fed 5 people with 5,000 barley loaves and 2 fishes. And Johnny Murphy was in the back of the church, and he said, well, what's so good about that? I could do that myself. And there was a big guffaw at the back of the church. And the Monsignor asked them what was happening. And the next Sunday he said, well, I had made a mistake. Yeah, actually, he fed 5,000 people with 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes. And he said, no, Johnny Murphy, maybe you could do that. And Johnny Murphy said, no trouble at all, he said, but what I had left over from last week. So the irreverence was actually everywhere at the time. But with the defeat of the Civil War, the tyranny of the church came back, and they retained their absolute domination until we had the shocking case of the mother and baby scandals. One other instances of that, I would counterpose the position in Hungary and Poland and in Ireland and in Argentina on the question of abortion. Poland now regularly points to Ireland and says that is a country that has lost its faith, of course, because it passed laws on the right to abortion. But the banning of the right to abortion in Poland drew forward a huge movement from below, the biggest movement apparently since the collapse of communism in Poland against this restriction. The other Catholic country, of course, is Argentina, which has just done the same as Ireland, really, in legalizing abortion. And of course, we have in the United States, you have states like Alabama, which makes it absolutely illegal. So you have the religion of the oppressor and you have the religion of the oppressed coming into conflict. And we should be quite sensitive to that. I agree entirely with the way that Anne McShane put it, that is how to approach it. Lenin approached it in that way when he said that you could be a member of the Bolshevik Party and still be religious. That wasn't a bar, although that wasn't, of course, the official guiding principles of the Bolsheviks themselves. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. The last comrade who's got a name down is Diana Issels. So can I just see any other comrades who want to come in before Mark sums up? Okay, Diana, let's see if we can get you. Yeah. Okay, you're free now.
Yeah. Oh, right. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Good. All right. There's lots of people lots of Christians, but I think there've been some non-ones since. But I'm born and bred committed atheist. I'm not sure I can call myself a Marxist because I wouldn't label myself after any person, and I'm not sure I know enough about Marx. But what I do know, I like. One thing that really irritates me about religion is, or attitudes to religion, is saying that there's religious people who have the right to make ethical comments and comments about morality, and that's just nonsense. Because we're humans, I mean, we're just one species of animal among loads of others. We happen to be a social species. So just for our survival, we have to be kind and nice to each other, just because we can't live as isolated individuals. And religion, the ethics behind religions, if they work at all, have to reflect that, and they do reflect that. And so that's a nicer positive side of religion. I have a problem with religion because I can't grasp the concept of supernatural beings existing. It just makes no sense to me at all. But what also makes no sense to me is claims that or if science advances enough, we can know everything. That's absolutely impossible. We can't. And I've come across atheists who really believe that we can know everything. I've come across people who are religious because they've got to believe in an all-knowing God. But whether whether you believe in a God or an atheist, the universe we live in can only ever be a complete mystery to us. What we know, what we think we can know, is actually very small amount of what there is. And I think about possibility of being a Marxist and believing in God. So there are African Americans. There were many African Americans quite recently descended from slaves who were communists and very religious. Their churches mattered a lot to them. And one comes to mind is Paul Robeson. I'm not sure whether he was actually a communist, but if he wasn't, he had very strong communist sympathies. And as far as I think he was very religious as well. So religion and Marxism don't go against each other. Not sure what else I had to say. I think well, that's probably enough anyway.
Okay, thanks, Diane. If there are any more comrades who want to come in, please indicate now, and I'll bring in Anne McShane again. Okay, Anne?
Okay, sorry. I just really wanted to respond to somebody in the chat there. I can't see who it was actually. Somebody in the chat put down that the Catholic religion doesn't oppose socialism, but in my experience, it most certainly does. In Ireland, the Catholic Church has been a force for reaction through and through. I mean, Jerry spoke about how the Catholic Church was regarded with, a lot less adulation, that basically people mocked it and weren't so afraid of it during the period of the Irish revolutionary period. But most certainly afterwards, the Catholic Church was really, really anti-working class and very much against socialism, Marxism. I mean, I remember first being attracted to the Soviet Union because of the pictures they had in our catechism saying that it was the evil empire. I was like, okay, well, if they say it's the evil empire, surely, to be God, there'd be something in it that would interest me, because for me, these people who ran our school, the nuns and the priests, I absolutely hated them. And in Ireland, most of the role of the Catholic Church, as Jerry again has mentioned, in respect of women, has been consistently reactionary and repressive. But what I was trying to say earlier is that there's a difference between the state and religion being combined and a religious hierarchy which acts to control and repress people. There's a distinction between them and the people themselves, because during the abortion referendum campaign, there were very many people who actually would have been mass goers, would have been Catholics, who went out and voted for the abortion, the right for women to choose. Obviously the legislation is not completely right, you're having a right to choose, but it is a huge lot better than what it was. There were people who walked out of mass because the priests got up on the pulpit and preached to them about the dangers of abortion. They said, you have no right to tell us what to do in our personal lives. I mean, this was really quite extraordinary in a country like Ireland that had been known for so long as being under the cosh of the religious orders. So I just think when people move away from religion, or people get involved in the struggle and become more secular, then their attitude to religion changes, but perhaps they will still have some religious beliefs or some kind of commitment, and, you know, don't want to feel it's all over when you die, but the hold of the religious church and state no longer has the same meaning, and that's a very, very good thing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Anne. And the last comrade who's indicated is Guy Brewer. Okay, Guy?
Hi all, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate all the contributions, particularly Ian. I think it's really helpful. I was a postgraduate at the University of Kent, studied under Professor David Cleland, who's a liberation theologist. He's done some great work on Marx and Marxism and Marxism after Marx. So just some suggested reading would be on Marx and Religion by David Cleland. Also at Kent, I was an undergraduate of Frank Brady, and there's a useful book on ideology and superstructure in historical materialism, which is quite helpful. So I just want to signpost people there to that. And I'm going to take away a lot of the comments. I've been elected the physical education officer in my Labour CLP. So this is a really helpful group, and I've really appreciated everything. So thanks, everyone.
Guy, could you send an email to the LLA website with any suggestions for reading, and the same with other comrades who've got a particular interest?
Yeah, how do I get hold of you guys? Oh, it's just here now.
Yeah, Tina's putting it up now. So if you send those suggestions in, I'm aware of David McClellan. Yes, he's been around even when I was a student.
Yeah, we pop down to Canterbury to see him every summer to make sure we're still holding the faith, as it were. So,
well, maybe faith's not the right word, but I understand what you mean.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. The email address in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mark, if you'd just like to come in and sum up now.
Just very, very briefly to answer some of the more recent contributions. I was quite interested by what Diana was saying, but just one thing I would pick up in relation to her contribution is, of course, she is right in the sense that Marxism and religion, the belief in the supernatural in that sense, I do think that it is clashes. It is against each other as ideologies in that sense. That doesn't stretch over to the actual human beings that are involved. I think it's possible for someone to have religious views and be a member of a socialist party, of a communist party. That is for their, from my point of view as an atheist, that is for their contradiction to work itself out within them themselves or not. That is the point. As long as they, don't try to turn the communist or the socialist party into a religious party, I think then it's a private matter in that sense. Although it is something that should be discussed and raked over in the organisation as well, because it's an important question. Jerry Dowling, I think, made some interesting points, and yes, he's right about the religion, to the differentiation of religion into the religion of the oppressed and the religion of the suppressors. I deliberately said in the course of the discussion, of the course of the opening, that I did not go into that, because it is something that is important, something that is actually very, very interesting, and there simply wasn't enough time. But absolutely, that dichotomy has been on show on many occasions in history. I also thought it was interesting about Jerry's point about Jerusalem and heaven coming to earth and that sort of thing in a funny way, because for my sins, I spent many a cold morning, evening, afternoon outside Collett's that used to be in used to be in central London. It was the CPGB's official bookshop. And for some strange reason, myself and other comrades who were selling newspapers, lefty newspapers, would be swamped on occasion by people coming away from some sort of religious service or whatever. I never quite worked out. And so, like anything in terms of human life, I suppose, you fall into patterns. And so I fell into a pattern of engaging with these people and talking to them about what their views were of heaven. And so, I mean, I'd ask people, well, is there money in heaven? They say, well, of course not. There's no money in heaven. Well, are there countries in heaven? Is there a place where all the Welsh live, and there's another place where all the Spanish live, and occasionally they go to war or something? No, there's nothing like that. Do people starve in heaven? You know, what? No, that's not. So what you tend to find then is, with religious people, even religious people who probably regard themselves in some ways as quite right-wing, and could be quite right-wing, they believe in a stateless, moneyless, classless society, all right, of equality, of solidarity, of human love in that sense, but they project that inspiring vision beyond the clouds, because they cannot see, and like we cannot see at the moment, but they cannot see a viable vehicle for bringing that type of society to this earth. So people very project their wishes for a decent human life, ironically, into a non-existent heaven, non-existent as far as I'm concerned. So I think, you know, it is by working together, by saying that if you do believe in a genuinely human world, your place is in the ranks of the working class, specifically in socialist, communist parties of the working class. And I think then, you know, it's a process of either living with the contradiction as an individual religious person, or in some ways leaving it behind, not rejecting it, etc., but it not becoming the operative form of how you interact with the world. It is a sensitive question. I certainly, if I've strayed into being rather crude or dismissive about it, I apologize to any comrade. That was not my intention. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening. I've got a great deal out of comments, contributions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And I'd like to thank the comrades who contributed, and also who contributed to the chat, which actually did inform the discussion. On that profound theological question about heaven and Wales, to quote Mephistopheles in another context, I thought the Welsh were already living in heaven, and that you already had it, Mark. You don't really need to go much further.
Absolutely, I'm in England. This is hell, nor am I out of it. I mean, Mephistopheles also said.
Yeah. That was the line I was thinking of.
Yes.
Anyway, comrades, I'd like to thank Mark and everybody for contributing. Next week's session is on Marx and nature, and I think is going to be again another interesting one, in the sense that it's looking at perhaps bigger and broader questions than we often do in political discussions, particularly about, I think, ideas on ecology, on the relationship between capitalism and the destruction of nature, and Marx's views on that type of relationship. So that's next week. The series will continue. We've got future sessions on Marx and the nation, on capital, and then on dialectics and Marxist philosophy. And there are one or two other sessions as well. Just to do a few plugs as well for the future, we've got a much longer series of educationals, a sort of historical, political series on revolution and counter-revolution in the 20th century, and also a number of sort of smaller sessions on issues of literature and specific historical topics. So there's a lot of educational work going on. For those comrades who have not been to the session before and asked questions about, for example, the relationship between religious movements and political radicalism, there were a number of sessions that took place, I think last autumn, on the history of socialism, which actually looked at some of those movements, particularly the utopian socialist movements and the plebeian movements. I spoke on the English Peasants' Revolt and also on the ideas of plebeian socialism, so and Christianity. So there's a lot of material on our website. Anyway, thank you very much, comrades, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. So thanks very much and good night. May your God go with you, as Dave Allen used to say.